The rain fell like a dirge over Boston, cold and unrelenting, soaking the streets in a dull grey sheen that reflected a city not quite ready for spring. From the 37th floor of Linwood and Associates, the world looked washed out, as if the city itself were holding its breath. The office, with its mahogany walls and silent oil paintings, felt like a courtroom today, somber and judgmental. Lucas Everett sat motionless in a high-backed leather chair across from Jasper Linwood, the Everett family's legal counsel for over 3 decades. Lucas had been in this room dozens of times before, for contract signings, dispute settlements, estate planning, but never like this. Never for something that could upend everything he thought he knew about the man who raised him. Jasper slid the document across the table with a careful hand, as though it might explode if handled too roughly. "This is the final certified version," he said, his voice low, his face unreadable beneath his wire-rimmed glasses. Lucas leaned forward without touching the paper. His name was there, typed in the usual legalese, along with detailed provisions. Trusts, philanthropic bequests. It was the next section that halted his breath. "To Miss Clara Monroe." The rest blurred. Lucas read it again. Then again, $40 million. A piece of family land in Nantucket that had been in the Everett name for 3 generations. Left not to a cousin, not to a foundation, not to him, but to someone named Clara Monroe, a name he had never heard before that moment. He lifted his eyes slowly to Jasper. "Who the hell is Clara Monroe?" Jasper didn't flinch. He had expected this reaction. "She's a nurse, ICU specialist, works at Brigham and Women's Hospital. Your grandfather met her during the last 6 months of his life." Lucas blinked once, as if that would clear the fog forming in his mind. "He left a third of his personal estate to a nurse?" "She didn't ask for anything," Jasper said gently. "Your grandfather made this decision on his own, with a clear mind." Lucas pushed back from the table, his chair scraping against the polished floor. He walked toward the rain-streaked windows and pressed one palm against the cold glass, watching the droplets race each other downward like fractured stars. "This is absurd," he said finally, his voice hollow. "My grandfather didn't trust the media, politicians, even most of his own board. He thought people were by default transactional. That trust was earned slowly and broken easily." "Yes," Jasper said. "And yet he trusted her." Lucas turned. "That's exactly what makes it suspicious. The man who told me at 15 that love is weakness leaves a third of his fortune to a woman he barely knew?" Jasper said nothing. He opened a thin leather folder and removed a yellowed envelope, sealed with deep red wax. The family crest, AI, soaring hawk with outstretched wings, was embossed cleanly into the seal. "What is this?" "A letter. Your grandfather wrote it by hand. He instructed me to deliver it only after you read the will." Lucas stared at the envelope. He wasn't sure he wanted to know what it said. The hawk on the wax stared back at him like a challenge. He broke the seal. The paper inside was creased at the folds and smelled faintly of cedar. The handwriting was unmistakably Daniel Everett's, bold, clean, all capital letters, as though, even in death, he refused to leave room for interpretation. "Lucas, you are my greatest pride. You have my mind, my will, my fire. But you lack something I lost long ago: faith in people. Clara Monroe is not a stranger. She brought light to my darkest days. Find her, talk to her, and please, for once, don't let judgment blind your heart." Dear Lucas read it twice, then folded it silently. He slipped the letter into his coat pocket. "Do we know anything else about her?" he asked, his voice tighter now, forced into calm. "She's kept a low profile," Jasper replied. "No criminal record. Lives modestly in Dorchester. Younger. Sister under her care from what we've gathered." Lucas nodded slowly, his thoughts already spinning. "I want everything. Bank history, social media, educational background, hospital records, anything legal can give me." Jasper frowned. "Lucas, she played him, Jasper. Maybe not for the money, but for sympathy, for control. And I don't know what game she was playing, but it worked." Jasper paused before speaking. "Is it possible you're wrong?" Lucas stared at him. Jasper sighed. "Daniel Everett was sharp until the very end. He asked me to draft this change to his will 6 weeks before he passed. He wasn't senile. He wasn't confused. He was intentional." Lucas straightened his coat. "Then I want to know what kind of woman convinces a man like Daniel Everett to change everything." He turned toward the door, stopping only once. When I know the truth, I'll decide what she really deserves. Jasper stayed seated as the door clicked shut behind him. The storm outside had only just begun, but inside that office a deeper storm had started to form. One built not of wind or rain, but of a man's unwillingness to accept that the person he loved most might have seen something he never could. Out on the street, Lucas pulled out his phone. "Marcus," he said, "get me everything you can on a nurse named Clara Monroe at Brigham. I want to know what she eats for breakfast." He hung up, and for the first time in his career, he didn't know if he was chasing a fraud or a truth he wasn't ready to face. The neighborhood smelled of wet concrete and fried onions. Lucas Everett stood across the street from a rundown apartment building in Dorchester, one hand buried in the pocket of his charcoal wool coat, the other clutching a manila folder marked with the forged Linwood & Associates logo. The rain from the day before had eased, but the sky remained a stubborn shade of gray. Above him, power lines sagged under their own weight, and children's laughter echoed faintly from somewhere behind a chain-link fence. This wasn't his world. Lucas knew Fifth Avenue penthouses, penthouse boardrooms, and restaurants where menus didn't have prices. He didn't know how to walk without glancing over his shoulder or how to pretend he wasn't entirely out of place here. But he wasn't here for comfort. He was here for truth. The address Marcus had sent him was scrawled on a torn scrap of paper in his wallet. Apartment 3B, 3rd floor. Her name was Clara Monroe. He climbed the narrow staircase slowly, the steps creaking beneath his leather soles. Paint peeled off the walls in curled ribbons, and the scent of mildew mixed with the unmistakable bitterness of reheated coffee. When he reached the landing, he paused, not out of fear but hesitation. The kind of pause a man takes when he knows what comes next may not fit the story he's written in his mind. He knocked. The door didn't swing open. It cracked an inch at first, then two. A sliver of a face appeared, soft brown eyes framed by worry, the kind that had spent more time watching monitors than mirrors. Clara Monroe was not what he expected. No designer earrings, no red lipstick, no performance-ready smile. Just a plain grey sweatshirt worn thin at the sleeves and a kind of quiet resilience in her eyes. "Yes?" Lucas put on the practiced mask he'd used in countless negotiations. "Miss Monroe? I'm Ethan Clark, legal liaison from Linwood & Associates. I'm here on behalf of Mr. Jasper Linwood regarding the estate of Mr. Daniel Everett." Her face changed instantly, but not in the way he was used to. Not excitement, not greed, just a flicker of something complicated. Fear, maybe. Or sorrow. "I already told the firm. I don't want anything," she said. "This won't take long," he replied. "But it is important." She hesitated, then opened the door. "Come in, just be quiet. My sister is resting." Lucas stepped inside, careful not to brush against the chipped walls or let the door slam behind him. The apartment was small, clean, and carried the faint scent of lavender and antiseptic. No art on the walls, no clutter. Just a bookshelf lined with medical reference books and a stack of grocery receipts on the counter. In the corner, under a soft reading light, lay a young girl no older than 10. Her skin was pale, her body curled slightly inward under a thin quilt. A soft beep came from a portable heart monitor beside her. Lucas's eyes instinctively narrowed. He knew that sound. He had heard it once when visiting his grandfather's hospital room. The rhythm of a fragile life trying to keep going. "That's Emily," Clara said softly, following his gaze. "She has pulmonary hypertension. We're managing it." Lucas didn't respond right away. He just nodded and took a seat at the tiny kitchen table when she gestured to it. The chair wobbled slightly beneath him. Clara didn't sit. She moved back to the stove where a kettle was beginning to whistle. "I don't have much to offer," she said. "Just some bagged tea." "I'm fine," he said. She poured it anyway and set the mug in front of him with quiet deliberation. Then she sat across from him, folding her hands around her own cup as if for warmth. He pulled the folder from his coat and laid it on the table between them, letting the logo face her. "As you know," he began, "Mr. Everett's revised will includes you as a primary beneficiary. The total value of the bequest is significant." "I know the number," Clara said, her voice low. "You haven't claimed it, and your communication with the estate has been limited." "I never wanted it," she said simply. Lucas tilted his head. "That's a hard thing to believe." Her eyes met his. "Believe it or not, Mr. Clark, I didn't take care of Daniel Everett for money. I was just a nurse doing my job. He leaned forward slightly. Were you assigned to him? No, she said, and her voice tightened. I volunteered. Lucas kept his face neutral, though his mind reeled. Volunteered? Why? He asked. Clara looked down at her tea. Because no one else wanted the overnight shifts in palliative care. And he wasn't easy, but he was lonely, angry, scared. He reminded me of someone I used to know. Lucas sat back. So you kept him company? I cared for him, she said. Bathed him, fed him, changed his IVs, listened to him, not because he was rich, because he was human. There was no self-pity in her voice, no righteous anger, just tired conviction. Lucas studied her closely. She didn't flinch. Under scrutiny. If anything, her back straightened, as though she knew exactly what he was thinking and didn't care to defend herself. And yet, he said slowly, you're now the heir to a fortune that could change your entire life. And you've refused to accept it. Clara's eyes flicked to the corner where Emily lay sleeping, then back to him. My life changed the moment my parents died, she said. I was 21. I dropped out of school, raised my sister, went to nursing college at night. We've never had much, but we have enough. I don't want Daniel Everett's money. I just wanted him to die with dignity. Lucas felt something shift in his chest. Not guilt exactly. Not yet. But something quieter. A seed of doubt in the story he'd constructed before ever laying eyes on her. You do realize, he said carefully, that refusing this inheritance formally still requires documentation. I'll sign whatever you need, she said. I don't want the press. I don't want the whispers. I just want to go back to being invisible. He believed her, and that somehow disturbed him more than if she had begged him for the check. He gathered the folder, stood and left his business card on the table. Fake name and all. If you change your mind, contact the number on that card. She didn't walk him to the door. She just turned her attention back to the tea kettle and the girl in the corner. Lucas descended the stairs in silence, each step echoing with more uncertainty than the last. Outside, the world had grown darker. The food truck across the street was still open, but the line had thinned. A man offered a sandwich to a woman with a tattered coat. No cameras, no gratitude. Just quiet kindness exchanged without expectation. He slid into the back seat of his car and didn't speak until the driver pulled into traffic. Marcus, he said over the phone. She's not what I expected. Should we keep digging? Marcus asked. Lucas hesitated. Yes, he said finally, but quietly. But he ended the call and stared out the window. Maybe she was genuine, or maybe she was just better at playing the long game. But either way, something in him had shifted, and for the first time in a very long time, Lucas Everett wasn't sure what to believe. The boardroom at Everett Global wasn't designed for hesitation. The sharp edges of its walnut table, the high-backed leather chairs, the frosted glass doors that muffled the outside world, everything about the room demanded decisiveness. But today that air of unshakable control felt thinner. Lucas Everett sat at the head of the table, his fingers loosely steepled, his gaze fixed on a printed headline someone had laid in front of him. Nurse inherits millions from tech tycoon. Angel or opportunist? The article was from a mid-tier outlet, the kind that thrived on ambiguity and viral potential. But Lucas knew the real danger wasn't the headline. It was the narrative it was beginning to shape. Across from him sat Margot Hale, Everett Global's longtime PR director, impeccably dressed in navy, her tablet glowing with projected analytics. This piece is already gaining traction, she said. It's been shared over 40,000 times in 2 hours. The story's too tempting. Nurse, billionaire, inheritance, mystery. It's practically writing itself. If we don't control the story now, we'll lose control of it completely. Beside her, Grant Radford, the firm's CFO, nodded. The market's sensitive. Investors are asking if there's a credibility risk. They want reassurance. Lucas leaned back in his chair. You want me to reassure them that my grandfather was too sharp to be taken in by someone like Clara Monroe? There was a pause. Margot folded her hands neatly. Lucas, we're not here to litigate whether she's good or bad. That's not our job. Our job is to protect the brand. Your name. Everett Global's future. We need to get ahead of this. He said nothing. Outside the window, the Boston skyline stretched into late afternoon shadow. Somewhere out there, Clara, Monroe was probably still beside her sister's bed, unaware, or perhaps all too aware, of the wave of judgment beginning to rise against her. Margot continued, "If she is what she appears to be, the story will fizzle. But if she's not, if this becomes a scandal, we lose weeks of momentum. This is business, Lucas. Personal discomfort doesn't change that." He looked at the headline again. The each font was bold, the photo grainy. Clara in her nurse's scrubs caught outside Brigham and Women's, her expression unreadable, mouth half open as if caught mid-protest. She looked more tired than cunning, more human than calculating. "Have we verified the leak?" he asked. "We don't know where it came from," Grant replied. "But the will's public now, and the rumors are feeding themselves." Margot tapped her screen. "We're proposing a limited media strategy. Nothing aggressive, just an early article from a reputable outlet reframing the narrative. Not an accusation, just a question. Who is Clara Monroe?" That's it. Lucas knew the language. He'd used it 100 times before to dismantle competitors, soften bad press, bury truth beneath a veil of plausible doubt. A question wasn't an attack. It was an invitation for the world to tear someone down. And now he was being asked to use that strategy on a woman who had sat across from him 2 nights ago, sipping tea beside her sister's oxygen machine, saying she didn't want anything. He closed his eyes. "She's already declined the inheritance," he said. "Which means nothing," Grant snapped. "That's what people do when they want to appear above suspicion. She's playing the long game. Lay low, win sympathy, then circle back for the money." Lucas opened his eyes slowly. "And if she doesn't, then the damage is done either." "Wait," Margot said gently. "You look reactive, weak, indecisive. That's not the man the public or this board expects." He turned to the window again, the glass a reflection of everything he wasn't ready to admit. He had built his empire on clarity, execution, strategy. Emotion was a liability, compassion a weakness. He had learned that from Daniel Everett himself. But that belief had a crack now. Clara had put it there. Not by what she said, but by how little she said. She had no PR firm, no legal team. Just a sister she was fighting to keep alive and a past that she didn't seem eager to explain. And yet something inside Lucas twisted with doubt. Was he really protecting a legacy? Or burying someone his grandfather had loved simply because it was easier? "Fine," he said at last, his voice cold with resignation. "Release 1 article. Nothing inflammatory, just a soft probe." Margot smiled. "We'll send you the draft before it goes live." Lucas nodded, but it felt like signing a confession, not for something he'd done, but something he was about to become. That evening back in his office, he sat alone long after the staff had left. The city lit up beneath him, but he barely saw it. He reread the letter Daniel had left him. The words struck differently now. "She brought light to my darkest days." What had Daniel meant? What kind of light? And how dark had those days really been? He found himself searching Clara's name again, sifting through hospital rosters, volunteer logs, obscure articles from local health fairs. And what he found surprised him. She had organized wellness workshops at community centers. She had worked with pediatric cancer patients on weekends. She had once spent a month at a medical relief camp in rural Maine. None of it was on a resume. None of it polished or promoted. It was like she'd wanted to disappear into usefulness. A ping pulled him back. An email from Margot. Subject line, draft media piece. He clicked. The headline read, "A quiet nurse, a sudden fortune." Who is Clara Monroe? The tone was measured, professional, no accusations, but the subtext was clear. The comments section, even clearer. Typical gold digger. She probably slept with him. Watch her show up in a new car by Friday. Lucas closed the tab, his stomach twisted. This wasn't control. This was cowardice with good lighting. His phone buzzed. A message from Marcus. She's been placed on administrative leave from Brigham. Unconfirmed, but sources say it's because of the media attention. Lucas stared at the message. A week ago, Clara Monroe had been a stranger. Now she was losing her job, her life's rhythm, because he had chosen to protect an image instead of a person. He stood walking slowly to the window, placing a hand flat against the cool pane. From somewhere below he imagined he could hear the distant beep of a hospital monitor, the kind that kept people tethered to life, the kind that had once echoed in his grandfather's hospital room, and now perhaps in Emily's. His reflection looked back at him, pale in the glass. He didn't recognize the man. Not entirely. The apartment was silent. Not the kind of silence that comforted, but the kind that made sound itself feel like an intrusion. Lucas Everett stood outside Unit 3B, the brass numbers dull and slightly crooked. He knocked again, 3 sharp raps that echoed down the dim hallway, but no answer came. He waited, knocked once more. Still nothing. He was about to turn away when the door beside him creaked open. An elderly woman in a housecoat and worn slippers peered out. Her hair was thin and white, pulled back into a hasty bun. She squinted at him through thick glasses. "She's not there," the woman said. "Took the girl and left 3 days ago." Lucas stepped closer. "Do you know where she went?" The woman blinked. "Didn't say, just that reporters wouldn't stop knocking. She said the air was getting too heavy for the little one." Lucas nodded. "Thank you." The woman tilted her head, studying him. "You part of the story, or trying to fix it?" "I'm not sure yet," he murmured. Back in his car, he sat still for a long time, hands resting on the steering wheel, eyes unfocused. The building behind him, grey, tired and oddly dignified, seemed emptier now, not just of Clara, but of a possibility he hadn't realized he was chasing. He had come here not to finalize paperwork or follow legal protocol. He had come to look her in the eye and ask a question he wasn't yet brave enough to articulate. Now, he would have to look elsewhere. By the next morning, Lucas had rerouted his entire schedule. No board meetings, no media calls, no investor breakfasts. He sent Marcus a simple message. "I need everything related to Daniel Everett's time at Ashford Senior Care. Staff names, visitor logs, especially the overnight nurses." Ashford was a quiet facility on the southern edge of Cambridge, nestled behind a row of old birch trees and a wrought iron gate that creaked when it opened. The exterior was designed to look like a stately manor with ivy crawling up its facade. Inside, however, time moved slowly, if it moved at all. Lucas signed in using his real name. The receptionist blinked at him, recognizing it instantly, but said nothing. She pointed him toward the nurse's lounge where an older woman was seated, with a crossword puzzle in her lap. "Mrs. Keaton?" he asked. She looked up. Her eyes were tired but not unkind. "Yes? My name is Lucas Everett. I'm Daniel Everett's grandson." The woman blinked, her face unreadable for a moment. Then she set the puzzle aside and folded her hands neatly in her lap. "Thought someone from your family might come around eventually," she said. "I wanted to ask about Clara Monroe." Mrs. Keaton didn't react the way he expected. No hesitation, no defensiveness. Just a long sigh, the kind that carried memory in its weight. "She was good," she said. "One of the best I've seen in 30 years. Quiet, serious, never late. Never lazy. Didn't look at her phone between rounds. She cared." Lucas nodded. "My grandfather trusted her." "He did, which wasn't easy to earn." Lucas hesitated. "Did he ever mention changing his will to you?" "Not in so many words," she said. "But he spoke about her often. Said she was the only person who didn't treat him like a legacy or a patient." "Did he give her anything?" "No. I think that's what made it real for him." She stayed. Anyway, Lucas stood in silence. "There's someone else who might tell you more," she added. "Walt Duran, room 106. He was your grandfather's neighbor here. They talked a lot. He liked Clara too." Room 106 was quiet, lit only by the filtered light of a cloudy afternoon. Walt Duran was seated near the window in a wheelchair, a faded book in his lap. His skin was papery, his hands large but frail. His eyes were sharper than Lucas expected. "I know who you are," Walt said as soon as Lucas stepped in. Lucas smiled faintly. "Seems like everyone does. Your grandfather used to talk about you. Said you had his eyes but none of his warmth." Lucas sat across from him. He wasn't exactly a warm man. "No," Walt said. But he softened near the end. "Because of her." Lucas leaned forward. "What happened between them?" Walt was silent for a long moment. Then he looked down at his lap, tracing the cracked spine of his book. "One night," he said, "I heard something from Daniel's room. A crash. It was late, after the last nurse rotation. I wheeled myself over, found Clara on the floor holding his wrist. He'd broken a picture frame, tried to use the glass." Lucas felt his heart stutter. "He tried to kill himself?" Walt nodded. "Didn't want to live another week. Said the pain wasn't worth it and neither was the loneliness. And Clara, she didn't call security, didn't alert the doctor, just wrapped his wrist and sat with him for hours, talking. I heard them through the wall. She said, "You're worth more than you think even now, even broken." Lucas closed his eyes. "She could have ruined his name," Walt continued. "That's what I remember most, she didn't. She kept his secret, never told anyone, not even the staff. After that he was different, a little less angry, a little more alive." Lucas swallowed hard. Why didn't she come forward after he passed? After the will? Because it wasn't about the money for her, Walt said. It was about dignity. For him. For herself. She had a code. Lucas rose, uncertain of his footing. "I've known a lot of grifters in my life," Walt added. She wasn't one. Lucas left the room without another word. The corridor felt too narrow. The air too thick. Outside, the sky had turned darker, and the first drops of rain began to fall on the windshield of his car. He sat behind the wheel, but didn't drive. Instead, he opened the glove compartment and pulled out the letter again. Daniel's handwriting. Stared back at him. "Don't let judgment blind your heart." Lucas had told himself this entire time that he was protecting something. The family name. The company. The story. But maybe it wasn't protection. Maybe it was pride. And maybe Clara Monroe had been the only one brave enough to do the one thing he never could. Stay with a dying man when there was nothing left to gain. That night, back in his apartment, Lucas couldn't sleep. The city moved, on outside his windows, humming with its usual late-night rhythm. But something inside him had stilled. He scrolled through dozens of headlines, social media posts, message boards. The story had grown its own teeth. Gold digger, homewrecker, opportunist. He clicked on a video someone had posted. Clara walking into the hospital with her head down, her arm around her sister, shielding her from photographers. And then something else caught his eye, a comment buried in the noise. Funny how no one talks about what she did before all this. She ran a mobile clinic for kids in Roxbury last year. Volunteered every weekend. Ask anyone at St. Gabriel's Community Centre. Lucas stared at the words. A new search, a new address, a new thread. St. Gabriel's Community Centre was a red brick, building off Tremont Street. Its director was a woman named Ruth Santiago, who answered his call with no hesitation. "Yes, Clara volunteered here," Ruth said. Quietly, never wanted credit. "We had kids with asthma, with diabetes, with nothing but a backpack and hope. She showed up with her stethoscope and her whole heart. I used to tell her she didn't belong in a hospital. She belonged in the world." Lucas closed his eyes. "Where is she now?" he asked. "She said she needed quiet," Ruth said. "Somewhere the cameras don't go." After the call ended, Lucas sat in the darkness for a long time. He thought of Clara's voice, steady but trembling, as she said, "I just want to go back to being invisible." She hadn't been hiding. She had been surviving, and he had thrown her to the wolves to save his own reflection. The truth wasn't loud. It didn't shout. It didn't break doors down or demand headlines. The truth had been sitting across from her, him all along. And now she was gone. The sound of applause echoed off marble walls. Lucas Everett barely heard it. He stood center stage beneath the crystal lights of the Avalon Grand Ballroom, accepting a leadership award from the Boston Business Council. His name was printed on the gold-embossed program, his biography recited. With admiration, and every hand he shook that night was warm with approval. And yet he felt hollow. Afterward, as champagne flutes clinked and the string quartet launched into a polite waltz, Lucas slipped away from the crowd, loosening his tie as he stepped out onto the terrace. The November night bit at his skin, but he welcomed the cold. It cleared the fog in his chest better than any applause ever could. He leaned against the stone balustrade, staring down at the street below. Cars moved like blood through the city's veins, efficient, indifferent. He wondered how many people down there knew Clara Monroe's name now. How many had judged her with nothing more than a headline, a grainy photo, or a well-crafted PR whisper. She was nowhere to be found. It had been 2 weeks since she disappeared from Dorchester. 2 weeks since Emily had been withdrawn from school. 2 weeks since the story about the inheritance nurse became fodder for daytime talk shows and Reddit conspiracies. Lucas had stayed silent, publicly, professionally, but inside something had been cracking. He hadn't expected it to haunt him. The way she had protected his grandfather's dignity, the way she'd sat at that tiny kitchen table and said she didn't want anything, not even acknowledgement. He hadn't expected her silence to be so loud. He reached into his coat pocket and pulled out the folded letter again. The ink had begun to fade slightly along the creases. But Daniel Everett's final words remained. You lack something I lost long ago. Faith in people. Lucas exhaled, a deep, bitter breath. He had once believed that faith made men weak. Now he wasn't so sure. Inside, a waiter tapped a glass to signal the start of speeches. Lucas turned and walked back into the ballroom, the smile returning to his face like muscle memory. But even as he stood behind the microphone and thanked the council for their faith in Everett Global, all he could see in his mind was Clara. Her hair tied back, her sweatshirt sleeves frayed, her voice quiet but unwavering. He had let them tear her apart, and for what? A legacy, a reputation? That night, Lucas didn't go home. He drove aimlessly at first through the empty veins of Boston. Then his direction sharpened. He didn't fully admit it to himself until he turned onto Tremont Street and parked outside St. Gabriel's Community Center. The building was dark, locked for the night. But he sat there anyway, staring at the front doors like they might open just by memory. He thought of calling Ruth Santiago. But what would he say? Have you heard from Clara? Did she ever talk about me? Tell her I was wrong? Eventually, he leaned his head against the steering wheel and closed his eyes. When he woke, the sky was bleeding into dawn, soft oranges and muted pinks painting the edge of the horizon. The world looked gentler in the morning. He drove straight to Jasper Linwood's office. Jasper was already at his desk reading a legal brief. When he looked up and saw Lucas, his eyebrows rose, but he didn't speak. I want to reverse the media campaign, Lucas said. His voice was quiet but firm. Jasper set down his pen. Too late. The story's already out there. You can't unwrite a narrative once it takes root. Then I'll plant a new one, Lucas replied. Jasper folded his hands. What changed? I stopped defending the man my grandfather used to be, Lucas said, and I started looking at the man he was when he died. Jasper didn't say I told you so. He didn't smile. He just nodded. Lucas paced the office slowly. Do you still have the full record of hospital staff notes from Ashford? Jasper opened a drawer and handed over a folder. You're not going to like what's in there. Lucas flipped through the pages. It was more thorough than he expected. Daniel's outbursts, his declining condition, the suicide attempt that had been quietly marked as an accident. And then, a note in Clara's handwriting buried in the middle. Patient asked to be reminded that he mattered. Responded positively to non-clinical conversation. Requested specific nurse be assigned to night shifts. It hit Lucas like a punch to the chest. He could picture it now. Daniel, brittle and bitter, surrounded by nurses who treated him like a case file. And then Clara speaking to him like a person. No fanfare, no agenda. Lucas sat down hard in the chair across from Jasper's desk. I need to find her, he said. Jasper raised an eyebrow. To say what? I don't know, Lucas admitted. But I need to say it. The next few days were a blur of dead ends and quiet calls. Emily's medical records were private. The hospital couldn't say where Clara had gone. Her lease in Dorchester had been terminated. Her bank account, what little he could find, was dormant. No new charges, no forwarding address. But then Marcus called. She used an old ID to check. Into a hospice outreach facility outside Bar Harbor, Maine. They needed extra night staff. She didn't even put her full name on the application. Just C. Monroe. Lucas didn't hesitate. He booked the next flight, rented a car, and drove through slushy mountain roads until the town gave way to forest and forest gave way to the sea. The facility was modest, a converted bed and breakfast now used for palliative patients. The lobby smelled of cedar and lemon. A woman at the front desk looked up as he entered, then blinked in recognition. You're Lucas Everett, she said. I'm not here to cause trouble, he said quickly. I just need to speak with her. Please. She hesitated, then nodded toward the garden out back. She's with a patient. Give her time. He waited by the frosted windows. 10 minutes later, the door opened, and Clara Monroe stepped inside. Her eyes met his. No surprise, just quiet sadness. She didn't speak. Not right away. I came to apologize, Lucas said. Clara nodded once but said nothing. I let them tell a story about you that wasn't true. Yes, she said softly. I told myself I was protecting my grandfather's legacy. And did you? Lucas swallowed. No, I think I buried it. She looked down. Her arms crossed over her chest. Emily got sick again. I couldn't risk cameras. Questions. She needed quiet. I know, he said. I saw the video, you shielding her. Clara exhaled long and steady. Why are you here? Because I can't change what I did, he said. But I can ask if it's too late to do better now. She studied him for a long time. Then, finally, she sat. Lucas sat too. There, in that small coastal hospice, between two chairs and the weight of everything unsaid, something finally began to break open. Not with grand confessions or dramatic tears, but with honesty. The kind his grandfather had found too late. The kind Lucas Everett had only just begun to understand. The next morning, fog clung low over the water, shrouding the coastline of Bar Harbor in a soft hush. It was the kind of morning that swallowed sound, leaving only the faint cry of gulls overhead and the rhythmic lapping of waves against weathered rocks. Inside the small hospice on the hill, Clara Monroe stood at the window of a private patient room, her eyes scanning the slow-moving horizon. Her breath fogged the glass faintly as she traced the outline of a schooner in the distance. She hadn't slept much, not after Lucas left the night before. The moment had stretched between them, like a drawn wire, taut, trembling, not yet broken. He had apologized, yes. He had looked at her not like a man seeking headlines or redemption, but as someone facing himself for the first time. Still, forgiveness wasn't something she could offer easily. Not when the world had taught her that. Silence was safer than expectation. She heard a soft knock. Clara turned, expecting a nurse or a new patient consult, but it was him. Again. Lucas stood in the doorway, holding 2 mugs of coffee. He looked out of place in this world of soft shoes and quiet corridors, yet he had changed overnight. No suit, no armor, just jeans, a dark wool sweater, and eyes that looked like they'd been awake too long. I brought peace offerings, he said. She didn't smile, but she stepped aside. They sat across from each other in the hospice's staff room. An old sunroom turned break space. The coffee tasted burnt, but neither of them cared. Clara spoke first. I'm not angry, she said. At least, not anymore. I'm just tired of being rewritten by people who never bothered to know me. Lucas looked at his mug. I deserved that. She studied him. Why did you really come? I wanted to see what the truth looked like up close. And now that you have? Lucas set his mug down. Now I'm trying to understand how I lived my whole life trusting numbers more than people. Why it took losing someone like you to see it. Clara didn't speak. She just watched him. Not with suspicion, but with caution. Like someone who'd opened a locked door before, only to be left with nothing but broken hinges. You don't have to forgive me, he said, but I want to make this right. How? She asked. You can't pull headlines back from people's mouths. You can't unmake the interviews. My sister had to change hospitals just to breathe again. Lucas flinched visibly. I know, he said softly. I'm not asking you to forget. I'm asking you to let me carry part of the weight. She looked away, out the window, toward the tide pulling back over the shore. I spent years learning how to be small enough to survive, Clara said. You have no idea what it costs to live a life where you only exist when people need something from you, and they vanish when they don't. He heard the truth beneath it. Not just about him, but about her whole life. The way the system had erased her compassion and the way he, without knowing it, had become just another eraser. I didn't see you clearly before, he said. And then I did. And it scared me. Why? She asked, her tone calm even. Because it meant I'd built everything I am on the wrong assumptions. Clara set her mug aside and stood. For a moment, Lucas thought she would walk away. But she only walked toward the small bookshelf tucked beside the window. She ran her fingers over the spines. Books on end-of-life care, on grief, on healing. She pulled out one and handed it to him. The Art of Presence. I don't know if people ever really change, she said. But I know they can choose what kind of presence they want to be in someone's life. Lucas took the book. He didn't open it. What kind of presence would you let me be? He asked. Clara crossed her arms, her expression unreadable. That's not something you get to decide with words. Later that week, Lucas began volunteering at the center. Not publicly, not for photos or headlines. Just quietly. He emptied trash bins, replaced blankets, sat with patients who had no family left to visit them. The work was mundane, often awkward, but he kept showing up. And slowly, Clara began to see what presence looked like when someone chose it daily. They didn't talk about what had happened. Not often. Instead, their conversations grew in the spaces in between. He asked about Emily's treatment. She explained the trial medication and its side effects. He listened. She asked about his company. He confessed that he'd stepped back, temporarily, maybe permanently. "You'd leave your empire?" she asked, surprised. "I think I'd rather build something quieter," he replied. Sometimes they didn't speak at all. They just folded laundry or scrubbed charts or sat in companionable silence while the Atlantic exhaled outside. And it was in that quiet that something shifted. One afternoon, as they walked back from delivering books to a bedridden patient, Clara paused. "You know what I hate most about all this?" He waited. "That now when people Google my name, they won't find any of the real things. Just noise, rumors, half-truths." Lucas nodded. "I'd like to help rewrite the story, but not for PR, for truth." She looked at him. Long. Hard. Then finally nodded. "Okay," she said. "But we do it my way." Together they returned to Boston 2 weeks later. This time there were no cameras, no press, just one scheduled visit to Brigham and Women's Hospital where Clara met quietly with the administration. She explained the situation, not to demand her job back, but to clear her name. Lucas sat beside her, silent, his presence a form of testimony in itself. They also went back to St. Gabriel's. Ruth Santiago cried when she saw them both. "I told you," Ruth said, hugging Clara fiercely. "You're meant for this world, not just its shadows." From there, they visited the Roxbury Mobile Clinic, where Emily had once played with finger puppets and refused her iron pills. Lucas wrote a quiet donation check. No name attached, just an envelope with a single note, for the ones who deserve a chance. That night, as they stood on the rooftop of Lucas's apartment building, looking out over the city lights, Clara finally broke the silence between them. "You're not the man who came to my door that night." "I hope not," he said. She nodded. "And I'm not the woman who answered it." "I know." They stood together for a long moment. "I still don't know what this is," she said. "Us, this thing we're building. It doesn't have to be defined yet," he replied. "It just has to be real." She looked at him then, really looked at him, and for the first time, her gaze wasn't guarded. "Then let's be real," she said. And it was. Not loud, not rushed, just real. Clara Monroe had never planned to speak into a microphone. Public attention wasn't her language, she communicated. In steady hands, quiet reassurances, and long silences that knew how to hold space for other people's pain. But when Ruth Santiago called and asked if she'd consider sharing her story at the annual Health Equity Summit, something in Clara shifted. It wasn't about redemption. It wasn't even about reputation anymore. It was about reclaiming authorship over a life that had been distorted by strangers, repackaged for ratings, and consumed without consent. When she said yes, Lucas didn't try to talk her out of it. He simply asked, "How can I help you prepare?" That was how they found themselves on a rainy Thursday in the community hall of the St. Josephine Civic Center, where the summit was being held. Clara stood backstage, her hands cold, her breath shallow. Outside the green room door, the low hum of conversation buzzed, journalists, healthcare workers, and non-profit leaders filling the folding chairs. Lucas adjusted the lapel mic the tech had given her, gently securing it behind her ear. "You don't have to prove anything," he said. "I know," she replied, "but I do want to tell the truth. Out loud, just once." She looked down at her notes, typed neatly, bullet points, and memories side by side. But what she carried inside her was more than any outline could hold. The hurt of watching her name become a headline, the anger of being disbelieved for being too quiet, and the bittersweet knowledge that healing sometimes meant being seen whether you wanted to be or not. She stepped onto the stage. The lights were too bright, the room too still, but she found Ruth's face in the front row. Lucas is next to hers, and she let that be her anchor. "Good evening," Clara began, her voice small but clear. "I'm not used to speaking in front of crowds. I'm more comfortable holding someone's hand during chemo or charting vitals at 3 a.m. A few polite chuckles. The tension eased. "I came here tonight because for the past few months, people have told my story for me. Strangers, anchors, bloggers, and I realized I could either keep hiding or I could show you who I really am." She told them about her early days at Brigham, about learning how to soothe frightened children and exhausted parents. She spoke of Emily, her sister, her light, and the battle they'd fought together after the diagnosis. She spoke of the patients who died holding her hand, and those who survived because she didn't walk away. Then she spoke of Daniel Everett. I was assigned to him during one of the worst months of his life. He didn't want to talk. He didn't want to be touched, but he was human. And somewhere beneath the layers of bitterness and grief, I saw someone who had once loved deeply. She didn't go into details about the night he tried to end his life. That story wasn't hers to fully tell. But I stayed, she said. Not for money, not for leverage. I stayed because I believe no one should die feeling unseen. There was silence in the room, not uncomfortable, reverent. She spoke too about what came after. The will, the media, the assumptions, how quickly we reduce women to motives, how easily compassion is mistaken for manipulation. She looked up then directly into the crowd. I never asked for his money. I only asked that his final months have dignity, and I would do it again. A beat passed, then two, then the first clap came, from someone in the back, then another, and another, until the room filled with the sound of something she hadn't heard in months. Respect. Clara stepped back from the podium, breathless. When she reached Lucas backstage, she didn't speak. She just leaned her forehead into his shoulder, and he wrapped his arms around her without a word. She didn't need applause. She needed peace. But for the first time, she had both. The next morning, the clip of her speech went viral, not because it was dramatic, but because it was real. Dozens of healthcare workers commented. Finally, someone said what we feel every day. Former patients shared memories of Clara with photos and gratitude. One woman wrote, "She was with my father when he died. We never forgot her." It didn't erase the damage, but it rewrote the narrative. Lucas watched it unfold from his apartment, coffee growing cold beside him. He wasn't the center of this story anymore, and that was a relief. He had learned something in Maine. Sometimes the best way to repair what you've broken isn't with noise, but with presence. He didn't call the reporters, didn't schedule any interviews. He simply sent Clara a short text. "Proud of you." "Always," she replied a few hours later. "Thanks for not trying to be the hero of this." And somehow that meant more than anything. They continued quietly, like a current beneath the surface. Lucas didn't move back into the spotlight. He began consulting for non-profit tech startups, quietly funding initiatives in rural medicine and telehealth access. The work grounded him, kept his hands full in ways that had nothing to do with profit, margins. Clara returned to work, part-time at first. She took a new position with a palliative care non-profit. Emily's treatment continued to improve, and the girl slowly returned to a version of her old self, more fragile in some ways, but also wiser than her years. And between the silence, something began to grow. It was not loud, it was not a fairy tale, it was real. They had dinners, walks, arguments, inside jokes, nights filled with exhaustion, and mornings filled with tentative smiles. Lucas never pressured her to define anything. Clara never asked for promises. But one night, as they sat in the kitchen of her small apartment, Emily asleep in the next room, candles flickering on the table, she looked at him and said, "You're not who I thought you were." "I know," he replied. She touched his hand gently. "But maybe you're who I hoped you could be." The newspapers moved on. New scandals, new names, new noise. But for Clara and Lucas, the quiet was finally a place of choice, not punishment. And in that quiet, they learned to speak again, to listen, to rebuild. Not for the world, but for themselves. The first time Clara Monroe realized she had started to fall for Lucas Everett, it wasn't during a grand gesture or some breathless moment stolen beneath moonlight. It was a Tuesday, mid-afternoon, rain against the window. Emily's test results had come in, clear. No new lesions, no signs of recurrence. For the first time in 2 years, Clara had allowed herself to take a full breath. Lucas had been there, crouched beside the kitchen drawer that refused to close, properly, fiddling with the rails and muttering to himself in frustration. He didn't even notice her watching him. That was the moment. Not because he fixed it. He didn't. But because he was there. Not as a billionaire, not as a man who once let the world tear her apart, but simply as someone who stayed. He didn't try to turn the moment into anything grand. He looked up, saw the tears on her face, and reached for her hand. "Still clear?" he asked softly. She nodded, and for a long time neither of them spoke. Clara had never believed in love stories that came after betrayal, but she was beginning to believe in love that could survive after truth. They became something like a rhythm. Lucas would show up with groceries, poorly packed and out of order, and Clara would repack them with a sigh and a soft smile. He learned how to fold Emily's laundry the way Clara liked. She learned how he took his coffee. Black with a single sugar cube, he always crushed himself. It wasn't perfect. Some days Clara would retreat into silence without warning. Other times Lucas would say something with an edge, unaware that he'd poked a bruise he couldn't see, but they apologized, and they tried again. That became the foundation. One evening, after dinner, Emily asked if Lucas was her mom's boyfriend. Clara froze at the sink. Lucas blinked. Emily, now 12 and sharper than ever, looked between them like a courtroom judge awaiting testimony. Clara turned. "Why do you ask?" "Because he's always here. And he looks at you the way Papa used to look at photos of Mom before she got sick." Lucas didn't know what to say, but Clara did. She crouched beside her sister. "He's someone who cares about us deeply, and we're figuring things out slowly. That's what grown-ups do sometimes." Emily nodded solemnly. "Okay, but if he hurts you, I'm calling Ruth and we'll bury him in the church garden." Lucas coughed, trying not to laugh. Emily stared straight at him. "I'm not kidding." Clara hugged her sister tightly. "I know, sweetheart. I know." That night, when Emily was asleep, Clara and Lucas sat on the balcony with tea and leftover apple crumble. The city blinked below them, hushed and indifferent. "She's not wrong," Lucas said, voice low. "About the way I look at you." Clara didn't answer right away. She wrapped the blanket tighter around her shoulders, staring at the stars. Caught between rooftops. "I'm still learning how to trust love that doesn't come with a price tag," she said. Lucas nodded slowly. "I'm still learning how to give love that doesn't come with conditions." The silence stretched, but this one was warm. Shared. "I'm not afraid of you," Clara said. "But I'm afraid of losing myself in this. Again." He understood. Because he had lost himself before. In ambition, in expectation, in the need to prove something to a father who never stayed long enough to be impressed. "We don't have to name this yet," he said. "Let's just keep showing up for it." Clara's birthday came in early spring. She didn't mention it, she rarely did. But Lucas had found the date in her resume from the old hospital file and tucked it away in his mind. That morning she woke to the smell of something burning. She rushed into the kitchen to find Lucas swearing at the toaster, smoke rising from 2 blackened pieces of brioche. "I was going for French toast," he muttered, coughing. Clara laughed, really laughed, for the first time in days. The rest of the day was quieter. He took her and Emily to the Arnold Arboretum, where the cherry blossoms were beginning to bloom, a soft pink mist hanging in the air. They sat on a blanket near the pond, fed ducks, and shared stories Clara had never told anyone. About her mother's lullabies. About the first time Emily called her mama instead of sister. About the way she'd once wanted to be a poet. "You already are," Lucas said, brushing a petal from her hair. "You just use care and silence instead of verses." Later that night, he gave her a small wrapped box. Inside was a pendant. Nothing. Expensive. No diamonds. Just a simple gold oval with a tiny engraved word on the back. "Stay." Clara didn't cry, but she leaned forward and kissed him. It wasn't rushed. It wasn't cautious. It was the kind of kiss that said, "I'm still scared, but I'm here." They didn't move in together. Not right away. Clara needed space. Emily needed consistency. Lucas understood, but he came over for dinner most nights. He learned which nights to stay late and which to leave early. He learned how to hold her after long shifts and how to step back when she needed silence. He brought books instead of flowers, and sometimes she'd find poems scribbled in the margins. Clara, in return, began to soften. She let herself laugh more, let herself ask for help, let herself need. One day she watched him kneel to tie Emily's shoes before school and realized that something profound had happened, quietly, without fanfare. She trusted him, not blindly, not perfectly, but deeply. Months passed. Life didn't return to normal. It built something new. Clara's work expanded. She was invited to consult on end-of-life care reform. She turned down television interviews, but accepted one invitation to join a panel on ethics and human dignity in medicine. This time Lucas sat in the audience, watching her speak with clarity, confidence and grace, Afterward, a woman in the lobby stopped her. "You're the one from that story, right?" Clara braced herself. "You reminded me that empathy isn't weakness." "Thank you." The woman walked away. No selfies, no requests, just truth. Clara turned to Lucas, stunned. "Did that just happen?" He smiled. "The world's catching up to you, Monroe." She squeezed his hand. It only took it long enough. That night, as they sat on her couch, feet tucked beneath a shared blanket, Clara looked over at him. "You know," she said slowly, "I never believed in second chances." "I didn't either," he replied, "until you gave me one." She leaned her head on his shoulder. "I'm not promising forever," she said, "but I'm here, fully." Lucas kissed her temple. "That's more than I ever thought I'd get." Outside, the world continued spinning. But inside that small apartment, something had finally settled. A love not born of rescue or fantasy or desperation, but a love that had been earned in silence, in truth, and in time. 2 years later, the garden behind St. Gabriel's Clinic bloomed with a kind of reverence only time could nurture. It had started as a patch of neglected soil, hard, dry, forgotten, but Clara Monroe had stood in it with worn gloves and a vision determined to turn it into something living. Not just flowers or vegetables, but a space where grief could sit beside joy and neither would need to apologize. Now rosemary and lavender lined the winding gravel path. A bench made of reclaimed wood rested beneath a birch tree where wind chimes whispered on breezy days. The sign at the gate read, "The Everett Garden for Rest and Renewal, dedicated to all those who chose presence over perfection." It had been Lucas's idea to name it after his grandfather, not out of obligation but as a quiet acknowledgement of how endings could plant beginnings. Every Tuesday morning, Clara could be found there, kneeling in the soil, coaxing green from ground once dry with loss. Volunteers came too, caregivers, nurses, social workers. People who had lost someone, or nearly lost themselves. The garden was never loud, but it was always full. Inside the clinic, a staff meeting was wrapping up. Clara stood at the front of the room, clipboard in hand, her posture relaxed in a way it hadn't been for years. She was no longer that nurse from the headlines. She was director of the non-profit, mentor to dozens, and still the same woman who believed in holding hands when medicine ran out of answers. Lucas slipped in quietly through the back door, nodding to familiar faces. He wasn't a co-founder in name, but his fingerprints were everywhere, from the software that tracked patients' comfort metrics to the partnerships with rural health networks across New England. His old boardroom suit now hung dusty in a storage closet. These days, he preferred it. Button-downs rolled to the elbow and work boots when he visited the garden. When Clara saw him, her expression softened. No surprise, just quiet recognition. "Field trip?" she teased, walking over after dismissing the team. "Stop by to see how my tomatoes are doing," he replied, brushing a smear of soil from her cheek with his thumb. "They're yours now?" He shrugged. "They bloom when I'm around." "Seems like a sign." She shook her head, smiling. "How's Emily?" he asked. "Fierce as ever. She's starting a club at school. The quiet girls who don't apologize." Lucas laughed. "Sounds about right." They stepped outside together, walking the gravel path slowly. The spring air smelled like mint and earth. Clara knelt briefly to pull a stubborn weed near the basil bed. Lucas watched her. He never got tired of this, of seeing her fully herself, not performing, not surviving, just being. "Do you ever think," she said, rising again, "about how none of this should have happened? If the will hadn't been written that way, if the story hadn't broken?" He nodded. "All the time." "Does it bother you?" "No," he said quietly. "Because all that noise brought me here. To you. To this." She turned to him, eyes narrowed with a half smile. "You still romanticize chaos." "Only when it grows gardens." They stopped at the center of the plot where a plaque sat beneath a climbing rose bush. For those who stayed, Clara rested her hand over it for a moment. Then she looked up. "I'm ready," she said. Lucas didn't move. "Ready for what?" "For you to ask the question you've been carrying." He blinked, then slowly reached into his pocket. No ring box, no script. Just a thin gold band, smooth and simple, warmed by his hand. "I don't need a ceremony," she said. "I just need to know it's real. That you choose this, every day." He didn't kneel. He didn't need to. "I do," he said. "And I will." She took the ring and slipped it onto her own finger. then reached for his hand. We'll still argue about laundry, she warned. I welcome the challenge. And I'm not going to start saying I love you 10 times. A day. Twice is enough, she smiled. And I'll still disappear into myself some days. I'll be here when you come back. They stood in the garden, hand in hand, surrounded by what they'd built. First in the dark, then in the light. No audience, no headlines. Just the sound of wind through branches and the quiet proof that love, like anything worth planting, grows slowly when tended with honesty, patience, and a little bit of rain.